house was too quiet for a Saturday morning. Normally, the air would be filled with the sound of cartoons, the occasional clatter of cereal bowls, or the steady hum of Elena shuffling through her usual morning routine. But today, there was nothing, just the faint creak of the floorboards as I moved through the house, the rhythmic tick of the clock in the kitchen, and the low drone of rain against the windows. I should have felt grateful for the stillness, for a moment of reprieve after another brutal week. But instead, it gnawed at me. Silence wasn't peace. It was an absence. A void. And lately, that void had taken up residence in every corner of my life. I poured a cup of coffee and stood at the window, staring out at the rain-slicked streets. The neighbor's kid darted by on his bike, the tires hissing against the wet asphalt. A dog barked in the distance. But inside, it was just me and the sound of my own thoughts. Elena wasn't in bed when I woke up, and I hadn't seen her since last night. She'd come home late again, her voice carrying that same detached cheerfulness that had become her default setting these past few months. There was no kiss hello, no how's your day, babe? Just a quick, hey, before she disappeared upstairs. She hadn't said where she'd been, and I didn't ask. I'd stopped asking weeks ago. Maybe months. What was the point? Her answers were always the same, something about work, or errands, or needing some time to herself. And I'd learned that pressing her only led to clipped replies or that icy silence that hung heavy between us, the kind that made my stomach twist in knots. Dad? The voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned to see Maddie, my 16-year-old, standing in the kitchen doorway. She had her earbuds slung around her neck, her phone in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. You good? She asked, tilting her head slightly. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Just thinking. Her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall, then back to me. Mom's not here? Guess not. Maddie shrugged, already losing interest. She said something last night about meeting someone this morning. Maybe Amanda? Amanda. Her coworker. Right. That was the name Elena always dropped when she needed a plausible excuse. But even as Maddie said it, I could feel the lie settling into my chest, heavy and cold. Maddie grabbed a water bottle from the fridge and was halfway out of the room before I stopped her. Mads. She paused, glancing back. Yeah? How's your sister? She shrugged. Chloe's fine. Probably still sleeping. She stayed up late drawing or whatever. I nodded, and Maddie disappeared upstairs. My daughters were growing up faster than I could keep up with, and lately, I felt like I was watching them from the other side of a glass wall. Maddie was sharp, quick-witted, and independent, sometimes too much for her own good. Chloe, at 13, was softer, quieter, but no less observant. They were my world, and I'd always tried to be a good dad. Present. Supportive. But lately, it felt like I was slipping away from them too. The rain eased up around noon, and I decided to get some air. I grabbed my jacket and told Chloe to text me if she needed anything. Maddie barely looked up from her phone to acknowledge I was leaving. I didn't have a destination in mind. My feet carried me through the neighborhood, past familiar houses and tidy lawns, until I found myself standing in front of the cafe downtown, the one Elena always mentioned when she talked about her brunches with Amanda. I stopped short. My breath hitched as I caught sight of her through the window. She was sitting in the far corner, her back to me, a coffee cup in front of her. And across from her, leaning in close with that easy, confident smile, was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, clean-shaven, with a crisp button-down shirt that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. His hand rested on the table, just inches from hers. I stepped back instinctively, my heart hammering in my chest. I told myself it didn't mean anything. It could be work-related. A meeting. A harmless conversation. But deep down, I knew. I knew. I watched them for a moment longer, frozen in place. She was smiling, really smiling, not the strained, polite smile I'd grown used to at home. It was the kind of smile that came easily, without effort or thought. The kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. When she reached out and touched his hand, just a brief, fleeting gesture, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. I turned and walked away before I could do something reckless, like march in there and make a scene. But the image of them stayed burned into my mind, playing on a loop with every step I took. By the time I got home, I felt hollow. My hands were shaking, and I had to take a moment to steady myself before stepping inside. The girls were in the living room, half watching a movie while scrolling on their phones. "Dad?" Chloe looked up as I walked past. "You okay?" "Fine," I said quickly. "Just tired." I locked myself in the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to clear my head. But the hollow feeling didn't go away. It settled deeper, spreading through my chest like ice. By the time Elena came home that evening, I'd worked myself into a frenzy. She walked through the door with a breezy hey, like nothing was wrong, and I felt something inside me snap. "Elena," I said, my voice sharp enough to make her stop in her tracks. "Where were you today?" She hesitated, just for a second, before flashing me that familiar, practiced smile. "I told you. Brunch with Amanda." My jaw tightened. "Don't lie to me." Her smile faltered, and for the first time in months, she looked directly at me, really looked at me. There was something in her eyes I couldn't place. Guilt? Fear? Or maybe just annoyance? "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice carefully measured. "You're not even trying to hide it anymore, are you?" I took a step closer, my chest tight with anger. "I saw you, Elena. At the cafe. With him." Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, crossing her arms defensively. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" My voice cracked slightly, but I didn't care. "I saw you, Elena. I saw the way you looked at him. The way you touched his hand." Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But then her shoulders sagged, and she let out a sigh. "Brian, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife is sneaking around with another man." Her jaw tightened, and she looked away. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand." But she didn't. She just stood there, silent and unmoving, as the weight of everything unsaid pressed down on us like a storm about to break. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a crack in our marriage. It was a chasm. The night dragged on, suffocating in its quiet. After our confrontation, Elena disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, replaying the conversation in my head, dissecting every word, every expression, every hesitation. Her face when I said I'd seen her, it wasn't surprise. It wasn't even shame. It was resignation. Like she'd been expecting this moment all along. I thought about following her, forcing the issue, demanding answers. But what was the point? She'd already shown me who she was. She didn't care enough to fight for us. The clock ticked past midnight. The house was silent except for the faint creak of the floorboards above as Elena moved around our bedroom. I poured myself a whiskey, then another. By the time the glass was empty, my head was buzzing, but it didn't dull the ache in my chest. I made my way upstairs, my steps slow and deliberate. The door to our bedroom was closed. I hesitated for a moment, hand hovering over the doorknob, before finally pushing it open. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me, staring at her phone. She didn't look up when I entered. "Are you going to tell me the truth?" I asked, my voice low but steady. She sighed, setting the phone down on the nightstand without turning around. "Brian, I told you, it's not what you think." "Stop saying that." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. "You're lying to me, Elena. Just admit it. Be honest for once." She finally turned to face me, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, or maybe it was guilt. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me who he is," I said, my hands clenched at my sides. "I want you to tell me how long this has been going on. I want you to tell me why." "Why?" She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Because you don't see me anymore, Brian. You haven't seen me in years." The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back a step, my chest tightening. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," she paused, rubbing her temples. "It means I'm tired. I'm tired of being invisible. Of feeling like nothing more than the person who makes sure the bills get paid and the kids have lunch and the house doesn't fall apart. I'm tired of being taken for granted." I stared at her, struggling to process the words. "You think I take you for granted? Don't you?" Her voice rose, her eyes flashing with anger. "You go to work, you come home, you sit on that damn couch and drink your whiskey like it's some reward for being a good husband and father. But when was the last time you asked me how I was? When was the last time you noticed me, Brian?" "I notice you," I said, though the words felt hollow even as they left my mouth. "No, you don't," she shot back. "You see what you want to see. You see the person you married 15 years ago, not the one standing in front of you now. And I can't live like this anymore." The room spun slightly, and I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. "So this is my fault? You're blaming me for you sneaking around behind my back?" Her face softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret. "It's not about blame, Brian. It's about feeling something again. Feeling alive." "Alive?" The word burned in my throat. "You think screwing some stranger behind my back makes you feel alive?" "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't about him. It was about me. About trying to remember who I was before this life swallowed me whole." I stared at her, my chest heaving. "You could have told me. You could have talked to me, Elena. Instead, you threw everything we built away." Her shoulders sagged, and she looked down at her hands. "Maybe I didn't think you'd listen." "Bullshit." The word came out sharper than I intended. "You didn't give me the chance. You just decided for both of us." She didn't respond. She just sat there, her head bowed, as if the weight of her actions was finally starting to sink in. "I hope he was worth it," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "Because you've destroyed everything for him." Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Don't you dare put this all on me, Brian. You're not innocent in this. You think just showing up is enough? You think sitting at the dinner table with your face buried in your phone makes you a good husband?" "At least I didn't cheat," I fired back. "At least I didn't throw away 15 years for some cheap thrill." The words hung heavy in the air, cutting through the space between us like a knife. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft patter of rain against the window. Finally, she stood, brushing past me as she headed for the door. "I can't do this right now." "Where are you going?" I demanded. "To the couch," she said without looking back. "I need space." And just like that, she was gone, leaving me alone in the room we'd once shared. I sank onto the bed, my head in my hands, as the weight of everything came crashing down around me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her at that cafe, smiling at him, touching his hand. And every time, the pain cut deeper. By morning, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning sunlight crept through the blinds, cutting jagged lines across the bedroom floor. I hadn't moved from the bed all night. My head throbbed, and my mouth tasted like stale whiskey and regret. Downstairs, I could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps. Elena. The sound of her presence felt like a taunt. I sat up slowly, running a hand through my hair. The house felt foreign, like I was a stranger in it. My daughters were still asleep, their rooms quiet. They couldn't know, that their world was splintering under the weight of their parents' lies and failures. The thought sent a fresh wave of anger through me, and before I could stop myself, I was on my feet, heading downstairs. Elena was in the kitchen, her back to me, pouring coffee into one of her favorite mugs, the one with the chipped handle she refused to throw away. She must have sensed me, because she turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Morning," she said, her voice clipped, cautious. I ignored the greeting, leaning against the doorframe. "We're not done talking about this." She set the mug down, her jaw tightening. "Not now, Brian. The girls will be up soon." "That's convenient, isn't it?" I snapped. "Hiding behind them when things get uncomfortable." Her eyes flashed with something: guilt, anger, maybe both. "I'm not hiding. I just don't think we need to drag them into this mess." "This mess?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean the mess you made when you decided to cheat on me?" "Keep your voice down," she hissed, glancing toward the stairs. "Why? Afraid they'll hear the truth?" I stepped closer, my chest tight with the effort to keep my voice steady. "Afraid they'll find out what kind of person their mother really is." Her face crumpled for a brief moment before she pulled herself together. "This isn't helping, Brian." "Helping?" I laughed bitterly. "I'm not trying to help. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to figure out how the hell we got here." Elena shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself like a shield. "We've been here for a long time. You just didn't want to see it." "Don't do that," I said, my voice cold. "Don't try to rewrite history to justify what you've done. I was here, Elena. I've always been here." "Physically, maybe," she shot back. "But emotionally? You've been checked out for years." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, I knew there was some truth to what she was saying. I had checked out. I'd let work and stress and the mundanity of life pull me away from her, from us. But that didn't excuse her betrayal. Before I could respond, Maddie's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What's going on?" We both froze, turning to see Maddie standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, a suspicious look in her eyes. Chloe lingered behind her, half hidden, her face pale. "Nothing, sweetheart," Elena said quickly, her voice too bright, too forced. "Just a disagreement." Maddie's eyes narrowed as she looked between us. "You're fighting." "You never fight." Elena glanced at me, pleading silently for me to play along. But I was done pretending. The truth was like a bitter pill lodged in my throat, and I couldn't swallow it anymore. "Your mom and I are having a rough time right now," I said, my voice steady but firm. "We're trying to work through it." Maddie's expression darkened. "Rough time? What does that mean?" "Maddie," Elena started, but I cut her off. "It means we're dealing with some things," I said, locking eyes with my daughter. "But we'll figure it out. I promise." It felt like a hollow promise even as I said it, but it was the best I could give her. Maddie didn't look convinced, but she nodded slowly. Chloe stepped closer, her wide eyes fixed on me. "Are you getting divorced?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena flinched, her hand flying to her mouth. I crouched down to Chloe's level, forcing a smile I didn't feel. No, sweetie. We're not getting divorced. Yet? She nodded, but the worry didn't leave her face. Maddie took her hand, pulling her gently toward the living room. Come on, Chloe, she said, her voice softer than usual. Let's go watch something. I straightened, watching them go, the weight of their unspoken fears settling heavily on my shoulders. Elena let out a shaky breath, leaning against the counter. Happy now? She said quietly. You just scared the hell out of them. No, I said, my voice raw. I'm not happy. I'm furious. But I'm not the one who put us in this position. She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the floor. I left the kitchen without another word, heading outside to the backyard. The air was cool and damp, the grass glistening with dew. I sank onto the patio steps, burying my face in my hands. I couldn't keep going like this. The anger, the betrayal, the constant weight pressing down on my chest, it was too much. I needed clarity, a plan, something to pull me out of the chaos. And that's when the thought came, sharp and unwelcome, I needed proof. Not for me, I already knew the truth. But for Maddie, Chloe, and whatever lay ahead. If this marriage was going to implode, if we were going to tear apart the life we'd built, I wanted the facts to speak for themselves. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. I didn't know what I was looking for, her texts, her emails, anything that would confirm what I already knew. But as much as I wanted answers, I couldn't bring myself to cross that line. Not yet. Instead, I called my brother, Caleb. He picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. Brian? What's going on? I need your help, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. I think Elena's having an affair. There was a long pause on the other end. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, deliberate. Okay. What do you need me to do? I don't know yet, I admitted, my throat tight. I need to know for sure. I need proof. Caleb sighed. This isn't going to be easy, man. I know, I said. But I can't just sit here and let this happen. I need to fight. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, control. Caleb showed up at my place that afternoon, dressed in his usual worn jeans and leather jacket. He was the kind of guy who always looked like he belonged in a fight, whether it was in a bar or a courtroom. He didn't ask questions when I opened the door, he just stepped inside, his expression serious. Where is she now? He asked, shrugging off his jacket. Out, I said, gesturing for him to follow me to the kitchen. She said she had errands to run. He raised an eyebrow. Convenient. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured us both a coffee and sat down at the table, my hands wrapped tightly around the mug. Caleb slid into the seat across from me, his eyes scanning my face. You look like hell, he said bluntly. Thanks for noticing. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Look, Brian, before we do anything, you need to be sure this is what you want. Once you go down this road, there's no turning back. I nodded, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on me. I need to know the truth, Caleb. For me. For the kids. I can't keep living in this limbo. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. First thing we need to do is figure out how to get proof. Have you checked her phone? No, I said quickly. I can't bring myself to do that. Caleb's expression softened slightly. Fair enough. What about her email? Social media? I shook my head. I haven't looked at any of it. Then we start there. He pulled out his laptop and opened it on the table. Do you know her passwords? Some of them, I admitted. Or at least, I think I do. Caleb's fingers flew across the keyboard as he pulled up a login screen. Let's try. It felt wrong, sitting there and feeding him passwords while he tried to access her accounts. Like I was crossing some invisible line, stepping into a space I wasn't meant to be in. But the alternative, living with the doubt, the uncertainty, felt worse. After a few tries, he managed to get into her email. My stomach churned as he scrolled through the inbox, his eyes scanning the messages. Anything? I asked, my voice tight. Hold on, he said, stopping at a thread labeled personal. He opened it, and I felt my chest tighten as I saw the name at the top of the emails, Logan Marshall. Who the hell is Logan? Caleb muttered, clicking on the thread. The emails weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The tone was unmistakable, familiar, flirtatious. There were inside jokes, plans for coffee, vague references to conversations that clearly hadn't happened over email. My hands trembled as I leaned over the screen, reading the words that confirmed what I'd feared. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. This is enough, Caleb said, closing the laptop. You've got your proof. I shook my head, my jaw tightening. It's not enough. I need to know more. Brian, he trailed off, his expression uneasy. I need to know, I repeated, my voice hard. Who he is. Where they've been meeting. How far this has gone. Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right. But you need to be prepared for what you find. This could get ugly. I'm already living in ugly, I said, standing. What's a little more? That night, after the kids were in bed, Elena came home. She moved through the house with practiced ease, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she set her bag down by the door. I watched her from the living room, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Late again, I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. She froze for a moment, then turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. I told you I had errands. Errands, right, I said, standing. Anything I should know about? Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her tone even. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done pretending, I said, stepping closer. I know about Logan. Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. But she recovered quickly, crossing her arms defensively. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice tight. Don't lie to me, Elena, I said, my voice rising. I've seen the emails. I know you've been meeting him. She opened her mouth to argue but then snapped it shut, her jaw tightening. It's not what you think. Don't, I said sharply. Don't insult me with that line. Just tell me the truth for once. She hesitated, her hands clenching at her sides. Fine. Yes, I've been seeing him. But it wasn't serious. Not serious? I barked out a bitter laugh. Do you hear yourself? You're married, Elena. You have kids. And you're sneaking around with another man. How is that not serious? She looked away, her shoulders sagging. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. That's not good enough, I said, my voice cracking. You owe me more than that. What do you want me to say, Brian? She snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. That I'm a terrible person? That I screwed up? Fine. I did. But I can't go back and undo it. I stared at her, my chest heaving. Do you even feel guilty? Of course I do, she said, her voice trembling. But guilt doesn't change anything. No, it doesn't, I said quietly. But it tells me who you are. She flinched, her face crumpling for a brief moment before she turned away. I'm going to bed. I watched her go, my heart pounding in my chest. The conversation had left me drained, raw, and more certain than ever that the cracks in our marriage were too deep to mend. As I sat in the darkened living room, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Caleb. Got some info on Logan. Call me when you're ready. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I wasn't sure if I was ready. But I knew one thing for certain, the fight wasn't over. Not yet. I called Caleb first thing the next morning. The house was quiet, Elena was still upstairs, probably avoiding me, and the girls had gone out with friends. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee as the phone rang. Caleb picked up on the second ring. You ready for this? Just tell me, I said, bracing myself. There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Then Caleb's voice came, calm and steady. Logan Marshall. 38. Divorced. He's a consultant, works with a bunch of marketing firms in the city. That's how they met, through some event she planned at her company. My grip on the phone tightened. How long? A few months, at least, Caleb said. Could be longer. Hard to say. He's been careful, no paper trail, no obvious signs. But they've been meeting regularly. Where? I asked, my voice sharp. A hotel downtown, he said. The Belmont. He books under an alias, pays in cash. My stomach churned. The image of Elena and Logan in some anonymous hotel room hit me like a punch to the gut. I leaned forward, my elbows on the table, trying to steady myself. There's more, Caleb said, his voice hesitant. Just tell me, I said again, harsher this time. He's been divorced for 5 years, Caleb continued. His ex-wife filed on grounds of infidelity. Looks like he's got a history of this kind of thing. Gets involved with married women, strings them along until things get messy, then moves on. I let out a bitter laugh. So she's just another conquest for him. Maybe, Caleb said. Or maybe she thinks it's something more. Either way, he's bad news, Brian. You've got to decide how you want to handle this. I know exactly how I want to handle it, I said, my voice cold. Where does he live? Brian. Where does he live, Caleb? There was a long pause. When Caleb finally spoke, his tone was cautious. He's in the city. Got a loft in Tribeca. But don't do anything stupid. Don't worry, I said, standing. I just want to talk. I parked a block away from Logan's building, my heart pounding as I stepped out of the car. The rain had started again, a steady drizzle that slicked the pavement and blurred the city lights. I pulled up the address Caleb had given me and headed toward the front entrance. It was a sleek, modern building, the kind of place that screamed money. The doorman gave me a suspicious look as I walked in, but I ignored him, heading straight for the elevator. Caleb had said Logan lived on the 6th floor. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out into a quiet hallway, the air thick with that faint, sterile smell of high-end living. I found his door at the end of the hall, 6C, and stood there for a moment, staring at the polished brass numbers. I raised my hand and knocked. The door opened a minute later, and there he was, Logan Marshall. He was taller than I'd expected, with a chiseled jaw and a perfectly trimmed beard. He was wearing a casual button-down shirt and jeans, his expression one of mild confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth. I didn't wait for an invitation. I shoved past him, stepping into the loft. It was as sleek and modern as the building, open floor plan, minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of place that was more about showing off than living. Hey, Logan said, his tone sharpening. What the hell do you think you're doing? I turned to face him, my fists clenched. You know who I am? He hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. And then it clicked. I saw it in his expression, the flicker of recognition, followed by a carefully composed mask of indifference. You're Brian, he said, crossing his arms. Elena's husband. That's right, I said, taking a step closer. And you're the guy who's been screwing her behind my back. He didn't flinch, didn't deny it. Instead, he sighed, like this was all just an inconvenience for him. Look, I get that you're upset. Upset? I cut him off, my voice rising. You think that's what this is? Upset doesn't even begin to cover it. He held up his hands, his expression calm. All right, let's talk about this. Like adults. Adults? I laughed bitterly. You want to talk about being an adult? Fine. Let's start with you staying the hell away from my wife. His jaw tightened, but he kept his tone measured. I didn't force her into anything, Brian. Whatever's going on between you two, that's not on me. You don't get to play innocent, I snapped, stepping closer. You knew she was married. You knew exactly what you were doing. And so did she, he said, his voice cold now. This wasn't some one-sided thing, all right? She came to me. The words hit me like a slap. I took a step back, my chest heaving. I wanted to hit him, to wipe that smug look off his face, but I forced myself to stay in control. She's not coming to you anymore, I said, my voice low and steady. Whatever this is, it's over. You're done. He smirked, leaning casually against the wall. You really think it's that simple? That you can just walk in here and tell me what to do? It's not a request, I said, my voice like ice. Stay away from her. Or I swear to God, I'll make your life hell. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. He straightened, his smirk fading. Fine, he said after a moment. You've made your point. I nodded once, then turned and walked out, my heart pounding in my chest. The elevator ride down felt like it lasted an eternity, the walls closing in around me as I replayed the confrontation in my head. When I stepped out onto the street, the rain had turned into a downpour. I stood there for a moment, letting the water soak through my jacket, trying to calm the storm inside me. It wasn't over. Not yet. But I'd taken the first step. And I wasn't backing down. The rain had stopped by the time I got home, leaving the streets slick and shimmering under the streetlights. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to gather myself. My pulse was still racing, my thoughts spiraling. The confrontation with Logan had left me feeling raw, exposed. But more than anything, it left me angry at him, angry at Elena, angry at myself for letting things get this far. When I finally stepped into the house, the smell of takeout greeted me. Elena was in the kitchen, unpacking containers of Thai food. She looked up when I entered, her face carefully neutral. You're late, she said, her tone casual, almost detached. So are you, I shot back, shrugging off my jacket. She frowned, her hands pausing over a container of noodles. What's that supposed to mean? It means we need to talk. My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made her hesitate. Not in front of the girls, she said quietly, glancing toward the living room where Maddie and Chloe were watching TV. Fine, I said, walking past her toward the stairs. Upstairs. Now. I didn't wait for her to follow. I went to the bedroom and stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The silence stretched until I heard her footsteps behind me. She closed the door softly, but the tension in the room was anything but quiet. What is it now, Brian? She asked, her voice tired. Haven't we said everything there is to say? No, I said, turning to face her. Not even close. She crossed her arms, her expression defensive. All right, then. Let's hear it. I went to see him, I said, my words cutting through the air like a knife. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. You, what? You heard me, I said, stepping closer. I went to see Logan. I wanted to hear it from him. Brian, that was completely out of line, she said, her voice rising. You had no right. No right? I cut her off, my anger bubbling to the surface. I'm your husband, Elena. I have every right to know who's been sleeping with my wife. Her face flushed, and she looked away. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you threw away everything for some guy who doesn't give a damn about you. That's not fair, she said, her voice trembling. Fair? I laughed bitterly. You're going to lecture me about fair? After everything you've done? I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her eyes glistening with tears. I didn't want any of this. But it did happen, I said, my voice hard. And now you need to own it. She wiped at her eyes, her shoulders sagging. I know I screwed up, Brian. I know I hurt you. But I was lonely. I was lonely? I interrupted, my chest tightening. You think I wasn't lonely too? Do you think it's been easy for me? The long hours, the stress, trying to provide for this family while feeling like I'm failing you and the kids at every turn? Her lips parted, but no words came out. I'm not perfect, Elena, I said, my voice cracking. I know that. But I never stopped trying. I never gave up on us. And you didn't even give me the chance to fix it. Her tears spilled over, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly swallowed by the anger still burning inside me. Do you love him? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost a whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. No, she said, shaking her head. I don't. It wasn't about love. Then what was it about? I demanded. Because it sure as hell wasn't about us. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. It was about feeling something again. About not feeling invisible. Her words hit me like a blow to the chest, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Invisible. That word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know you felt that way, I said finally, my voice raw. Because I didn't tell you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I should have, but I didn't. And by the time I realized how far apart we'd grown, it felt too late. I sank into the armchair by the window, running a hand through my hair. It wasn't too late, Elena. It's never too late if you're willing to fight for it. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of regret and longing. Do you still want to fight for it? The question hung between us, and for the first time, I didn't have an answer. I wanted to say yes, to tell her that we could fix this, that we could rebuild what we'd lost. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could trust her again. I didn't know if I wanted to. I don't know, I said finally, my voice quiet. I don't know if I can. Her face crumpled, and she nodded, as if she'd been expecting that answer. I'm sorry, Brian. For everything. Sorry doesn't change what you did, I said, my voice hardening again. It doesn't erase the lies, the betrayal. I know, she said, standing. But it's all I have. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. I'll sleep on the couch tonight. She left without another word, And I was alone again, the silence of the room pressing down on me like a weight. I stared out the window, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. We were supposed to be a team, partners, a family. But now, all I could see were the broken pieces of the life we'd built together. And I had no idea how to put them back together. The next morning, the house was heavy with unspoken words. I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, but when I went downstairs, Elena wasn't there. She'd left a note on the counter, short, detached. Took the girls to brunch. We'll be back later. I crumpled the note in my fist, tossing it into the sink. The idea of her playing the perfect mother, pretending like everything was fine, made my stomach churn. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the clock, the hours ticking by in slow motion. By the time Caleb called, I was ready to climb the walls. "Got a minute?" he asked when I picked up. "What now?" I said, rubbing my temples. "I've been digging," he said. "There's more." "More?" I felt the anger rise again, sharp and bitter. What else could there possibly be? "Logan's a piece of work," Caleb said. "He's got other women, Brian. Married women. It's a pattern. He gets them hooked, makes them feel special, then drops them the second things get complicated." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I gripped the phone tighter, my jaw clenching. "You're saying she's just another one of his marks?" "Looks like it," Caleb said. "I found a woman, Lisa. She was involved with him a couple years ago. Same story. She thought it was love, he thought it was a game." I closed my eyes, the anger burning in my chest. "Did you talk to her?" "Not yet," he said. "But I can. If you want to know how far this goes, Lisa might have answers." I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to let it go, to stop digging and try to figure out what the hell to do with what I already knew. But another part, the louder part, needed every piece of the puzzle, no matter how ugly it was. "Do it," I said finally. "Talk to her. Find out everything." When Elena and the girls came home, I was sitting on the couch, waiting. Maddie breezed past me with a distracted "Hey, Dad," and Chloe followed close behind, clutching it to go back. Elena lingered by the door, her expression guarded. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Just peachy," I said, my tone sharp enough to make her flinch. "We need to talk." Her eyes flicked to the living room, where Maddie and Chloe were settling in. "Not now." "Yes, now," I said, standing. "Upstairs." "Let's go." She sighed, her shoulders slumping, but she followed me. When we reached the bedroom, I closed the door, turning to face her. "Caleb found something," I said, watching her closely. Her face paled, but she didn't say anything. "Logan has a history," I continued. "Other women. Other marriages. You're not the first." She blinked, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you being just another notch on his belt," I said, my voice cold. "You think he cared about you? You think you were special? He's done this before, Elena. Over and over again." She shook her head, her lips trembling. "That's not true." "It is," I said, stepping closer. "And you knew, didn't you? You knew exactly who he was, but you went along with it anyway." Tears spilled over her cheeks, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't know," she said, her voice muffled. I thought it was different." "Different?" I laughed bitterly. "You thought what? That you'd change him? That he'd leave his bachelor life behind for you?" She didn't answer, her sobs shaking her shoulders. I stood there, staring at her, the anger boiling inside me. "You threw everything away for a lie," I said, my voice hard. "Was it worth it?" Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with anger. "Don't you dare put this all on me, Brian. I made a mistake, but I'm not the only one who broke this marriage." "Oh, don't worry," I shot back. "I'm well aware of my faults. But at least I didn't invite someone else into our life." Her expression softened, the fight draining out of her. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said quietly. "I didn't think." "You didn't think," I said, cutting her off. "That's the problem." We sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make her feel the same pain she'd caused me. But I was too tired. Too hollowed out. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you hate me?" I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for so many years, the mother of my children, the person who had betrayed me in the worst way. And I realized I didn't know the answer. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know what I feel anymore." She nodded, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "I'm sorry," she said again, the words broken and raw. "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It doesn't make it go away." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't know what else to do." "Neither do I said, turning toward the door. "But I know one thing, we can't keep going like this." I left her there, sitting on the bed, her sobs echoing in my ears as I walked downstairs. Maddie and Chloe looked up as I entered the living room, their expressions worried. "Dad?" Maddie said, her voice hesitant. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, the effort almost painful. "Yeah," I lied. "Everything's fine." But as I sat down, the weight of everything pressed down on me like a storm cloud, dark and unrelenting. And I knew the worst was still to come. I spent the next day in a haze, trying to keep myself busy, trying not to think about everything that was unraveling around me. Elena stayed out of my way, and I stayed out of hers. The girls noticed, of course, they weren't stupid, but I couldn't bring myself to address it. Not yet. That evening, Caleb called again. I stepped outside to take the call, the crisp evening air biting at my skin. "Lisa agreed to meet," he said without preamble. "When?" I asked, leaning against the porch railing. "Tomorrow afternoon," he said. "She's nervous, but she's willing to talk." "Where?" "A diner near her place," he said. "Quiet, out of the way. She doesn't want to be seen." "Fine," I said, my jaw tightening. "I'll be there." Caleb hesitated. "Brian, are you sure about this? You're already carrying so much. Do you really need more?" "I need the truth," I said, my voice firm. "All of it." The diner was small and unassuming, tucked into a quiet corner of the city. When I walked in, the smell of coffee and fried food hit me, mingling with the low hum of conversation. Caleb was already there, sitting in a booth near the back. Across from him was Lisa. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wary. She was in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail and a face that carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of coffee. "Lisa, this is Brian," Caleb said as I slid into the booth. She nodded, her eyes scanning my face. "You're the husband?" "That's right," I said, my voice steady. "And you're the ex?" She let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. "Not exactly a badge of honor, but yeah." I glanced at Caleb, who gave me a slight nod. "Lisa, I need to know about him." "About Logan." Her hands tightened around the cup, her knuckles white. What do you want to know? Everything, I said. Who he is, what he does, how he works. She looked away for a moment, her gaze fixed on the table. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost detached. He's a manipulator. Charming, confident, says all the right things. He makes you feel seen, like you're the only person in the world who matters. And then, when he's done with you, he walks away like you never existed. Her words hit like a hammer, each one driving home a truth I already knew but didn't want to face. How long were you with him? About a year, she said, her voice bitter. I was married at the time. He knew that, but he didn't care. He said all the right things, made me believe I was special, that he was different. She laughed again, a sharp, hollow sound. I was stupid enough to believe him. What happened? I asked. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to Caleb before settling back on me. My husband found out. Confronted him. Logan acted like it was no big deal, like he hadn't just blown up my life for fun. And then, when things got messy, he disappeared. Blocked my number, moved on to someone else. I clenched my fists under the table, my chest tight with anger. Did you ever try to warn anyone? Who? She said, her voice sharp. The next woman? And say what? That the charming guy buying her coffee is a predator? They wouldn't believe me. I didn't believe it until it was too late. I sat back, my mind racing. Every word she said painted a clearer picture of the man who had invaded my life, the man who had taken advantage of Elena when she was vulnerable. Does he still try to contact you? I asked. She shook her head. No. Once he's done, he's done. It's like you never existed. I nodded, trying to process everything. Thank you, I said finally. For telling me. She gave me a small, sad smile. Don't thank me. Just, don't let him get away with it. That night, I confronted Elena again. She was sitting in the living room, scrolling mindlessly through her phone. The girls were upstairs, the house quiet except for the low hum of the TV. We need to talk, I said, standing in the doorway. She looked up, her expression wary. About what? Logan, I said, stepping into the room. I talked to someone who knows him. Lisa. Her face paled, and she set her phone down. Lisa? One of the many women he's strung along, I said, my voice cold. She told me everything. How he works. How he uses people and then moves on. How he doesn't care about anyone but himself. Elena stared at me, her eyes wide. Brian, do you still think he cared about you? I demanded, my voice rising. Do you still think you were special to him? Tears filled her eyes, but she shook her head. I don't know. I don't know what I thought. You thought wrong, I said, stepping closer. He didn't love you, Elena. He doesn't love anyone. She looked down, her shoulders trembling. I was stupid. Yes, you were, I said, my voice harsh. But you weren't just stupid. You were selfish. You didn't care who you hurt as long as you got to feel good for a while. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with anger. Don't you dare stand there and act like you're blameless, Brian. You weren't there for me. You didn't see me. And that justifies this? I shot back. Because you felt invisible, you decided to destroy everything we built? I didn't mean to destroy it, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But it did, I said, my voice cold. And now we have to live with it. She covered her face with her hands, her sobs muffled. I turned away, my chest heaving, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a crushing force. This wasn't just about Logan anymore. This was about us, about everything we'd lost, everything we'd become. And I didn't know if there was anything left to save. The days that followed were a blur of cold silences and unfinished conversations. Elena and I orbited around each other like strangers, the tension thick enough to suffocate. The girls noticed, of course. Maddie asked outright what was going on, her tone sharp and accusing, but I didn't have the heart, or the words, to tell her. Chloe, on the other hand, just watched, her quiet eyes tracking every fractured moment like she was bracing for the worst. I slept in the guest room. Elena didn't argue or try to stop me. That silence, that lack of fight, felt like another betrayal. If she wasn't even willing to fight for us, what was left? One night, after the girls were asleep, I found myself back in the kitchen, nursing a whiskey. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet, the rhythmic sound gnawing at my nerves. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I glanced at it, expecting another message from Caleb. It wasn't Caleb. It was Logan. The message was short, smug, like it had been written just to twist the knife. "You should let her go, Brian. She's already moved on." My hand tightened around the phone, the fury rising so fast I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I stared at the words, the audacity of them, the sheer arrogance. And before I could stop myself, I was dialing his number. He picked up on the second ring. "Brian," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "Didn't think I'd hear from you. What the hell do you think you're doing?" I growled. "Just being honest," he said. "You're wasting your time trying to fix something that's already broken." "You don't get to tell me what's broken," I snapped. "And you sure as hell don't get to tell me how to fix it." He chuckled, low and condescending. "You're angry. I get it. But this isn't about me, Brian. It's about her. She made the choice. You manipulated her," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You preyed on her when she was vulnerable." "Vulnerable," he said, the amusement clear in his voice. "She wasn't vulnerable, Brian. She was bored. Lonely. And I gave her what she needed." My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles white. "Stay the hell away from my family. If I so much as see you near her again." "What?" he interrupted, his voice sharp now, mocking. "What are you going to do, Brian? You think you can intimidate me? You think this little call is going to change anything?" I opened my mouth to respond, but he kept going, his tone turning colder, harder. "Face it, man. You've already lost. She's not yours anymore. She hasn't been for a long time." I slammed the phone down, the sound echoing through the empty kitchen. My chest heaved, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The rage coursing through me was like nothing I'd ever felt before, hot and all-consuming, threatening to burn everything in its path. I didn't realize Elena was standing in the doorway until she spoke. "Brian?" I turned to see her, her face pale, her eyes wide with worry. She was clutching the edge of the doorframe, like she needed it to keep herself upright. "What?" I snapped, the word coming out harsher than I intended. Her gaze flicked to the phone on the counter, then back to me. "Who are you talking to?" "You know damn well who," I said, my voice low and dangerous. She flinched, her shoulders sagging. "Why? Why are you still doing this? Why?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Because he has the nerve to act like he owns you. Like you're some trophy he won." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. But then her expression hardened, and she stepped closer. "He doesn't own me, Brian. And neither do you." The words hit like a slap, sharp and unexpected. I stared at her, my chest tight. "That's what you think this is about? Ownership?" "I don't know what this is about anymore," she said, her voice trembling. All I know is that I can't keep doing this. The fighting, the silence, the constant reminders of everything we've lost, I can't. Neither can I said, my voice quiet now, the anger draining out of me. But I don't know how to move past it, Elena. I don't know how to forgive you. She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Maybe you can't. Maybe this is the end. The silence that followed was deafening. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that we could find a way through this. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, I wasn't sure I believed them anymore. I think we should separate, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. At least for a while. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I stared at her, my heart pounding, my mind racing. And what about the girls? We'll tell them together, she said, her voice steady now, resolute. We'll make it as easy as we can for them. I nodded slowly, the reality of her words sinking in. This was it. The end of everything we'd built, everything we'd fought for. And I had no idea what came next. The next morning, we sat the girls down. Maddie's face was a mask of anger, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Chloe just stared at us, her expression blank, her silence louder than any words could have been. We'll still be a family, Elena said, her voice soothing, rehearsed. Just, in a different way. Maddie scoffed, crossing her arms. That's bullshit. Maddie, I said, my voice low. No, she snapped, glaring at me. You don't get to tell me how to feel. You don't get to sit there and pretend like everything's fine when it's not. Chloe reached for her sister's hand, her voice small. Will we still see both of you? Of course, Elena said quickly. Nothing will change for you too. But we all knew that wasn't true. Everything had already changed. That night, as I packed my things for the guest room, I found a photo on the nightstand. It was from our honeymoon, taken on the beach. We looked so happy, so certain of the life ahead of us. I stared at it for a long time, the weight of everything crashing down on me. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. This wasn't the ending I wanted. But it was the one we had. A year passed. The house felt different without Elena, quieter but not empty. We'd agreed she would stay in the family home with the girls, while I moved to a small apartment a few miles away. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best compromise we could come up with. Maddie and Chloe split their time between us, though it became clear early on that Maddie blamed me more than her mother. I didn't fight her on it. She needed someone to be angry with, and I could take it. Elena and I spoke only when we had to, coordinating schedules, school events, doctor's appointments. Our conversations were polite, distant, devoid of the warmth that had once defined our partnership. We were co-parents now, nothing more. It wasn't easy. The nights were the worst, alone in the small apartment with only my thoughts for company. There were moments when I thought about calling her, about trying to rebuild something, anything, from the ashes of our marriage. But those moments always passed. Some things, I'd learned, were broken beyond repair. Maddie started therapy a few months after the separation. She hated it at first, but slowly, I saw the walls she'd built around herself start to crack. Chloe was harder to read. She kept her emotions close, retreating into her art and her books. I tried to be there for both of them, but I always felt like I was coming up short. Elena, to her credit, tried too. She apologized to the girls, took responsibility for her part in everything, and worked to rebuild their trust. It was slow going, but I could see the effort. And for that, I was grateful. One afternoon, about a year after the separation, Maddie called me out of the blue. I was sitting at my desk, going over a pile of work emails, when my phone buzzed. Hey, Mads, I said, leaning back in my chair. "What's up? Can we talk?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Of course," I said, my chest tightening. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said quickly. I've been thinking. About everything." I waited, giving her the space to find her words. "I was so mad at you," she said finally, her voice quiet. "I thought it was all your fault. But now, I don't know. I think maybe I was just mad because it was easier than being sad." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's okay to be mad, Mads. I get it." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think you'll ever get back together? You and Mom?" The question caught me off guard, and I had to take a moment to gather my thoughts. "I don't think so," I said honestly. "But that doesn't mean we don't love you and Chloe. That'll never change." "I know," she said, her voice small. I wish things were different." "Me too," I said softly. "Me too." Months turned into seasons, and slowly, life started to feel normal again, or at least, a new kind of normal. Maddie got her driver's license, and Chloe won an award for one of her paintings. I went to every school event, every recital, every parent-teacher conference, determined to show them that no matter what happened between me and Elena, I was still their dad. Elena and I settled into a rhythm. There were moments, at birthday parties, school functions, shared holidays, when we'd catch each other's eye and share a quiet understanding. We'd loved each other once. That love had built a family, a life. And while it hadn't lasted, it had mattered. It still mattered. One evening, I found myself at the beach where Elena and I had honeymooned. The photo of us from that trip was still tucked away in a drawer at my apartment, but I hadn't looked at it in months. I didn't need to. I remembered it clearly, the way we'd laughed, the way we'd believed the world was ours. The sand was cool under my feet, the waves lapping gently at the shore. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. But because I'd learned to live with the imperfections, the scars, the cracks. I'd learned that life wasn't about erasing pain, it was about carrying it, finding a way to move forward in spite of it. I thought about Elena, about Maddie and Chloe, about everything we'd been through. And I realized something. We hadn't lost everything. We'd lost what we were. But what we were becoming, that was still taking shape. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.